Hi guys, I'm Kyungmi Kim at Korea Institute of Psychoeducation. We use the word pleasure a lot, but not many people know about the true nature of it. In fact, everyone wants pleasure, but no one wants to admit that they want it, because it seems to be somehow tabooed, socially, morally, or religiously. The pursuit of pleasure is not from altruistic motivation. Pleasure is generated through the stimulation of one's own senses, and the level of pleasure is the strongest, especially when all five senses are engaged. These senses belong to you, not others. In fact, there is no such thing as pleasure for the sake of others. Pleasure is only for yourself. When you get yourself immersed in chasing pleasure, you gradually lose your selflessness and become a person who is willing to sacrifice everything else for your own pleasure. This is something we must guard against religiously, socially, and morally, which is why the word pleasure somehow has a negative connotation and feels like something we shouldn't say openly or casually. Pleasure itself is not a bad thing. It is just a feeling of satisfaction and enjoyment. Even if we can't be hedonistic in every part of our lives, feeling pleasure often creates great energy and enthusiasm in our lives. Then, how can we distinguish between healthy and unhealthy pleasure? First, pursuing pleasure with the goal of fulfilling our own needs and desires creates problems. This is because the power generated from pleasure is used to fuel your needs and desire further, and you end up being dominated by your desire, dependent on pleasure, and chasing only pleasure in life. On the other hand, enjoying pleasure without any selfish desire or purpose doesn't cause any problem. There was no selfish desire or purpose in the first place, so there is no desire to be fed by the power of pleasure. This pure pleasure can be a great source of energy and passion in your life, enriching your life so the more opportunities you have for pleasure, the healthier you are. One of the greatest sources of pleasure for humans is sexual activity. Pleasure intensifies with stimulus in the five senses added up: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, and in having sex, all five are activated simultaneously. When you have sex without selfish desire and purpose of your own pleasure, like sex between a married couple, it doesn't cause problems. This kind of pleasure creates energy that keeps the couple and family together in this tough world. On the other hand, the stronger the desire and purpose of pleasure, the more problems having sex causes. It intensifies stress and wounds in yourself and the partner, leads to possessiveness or dependence on the partner, and finally to criminal behaviors such as fanatical obsession with the partner or coercive sexual behaviors. These are the kinds of pleasures that religious, social, and moral boundaries guard against. The criterion by which we can judge whether a pleasure is healthy or unhealthy is whether it is driven by selfish desires and purposes, or whether it arises and passes away naturally and incidentally without desires and purposes. In fact, it is our selfish desires and purposes, not pleasure, that should be guarded against. It is worth noting that if we can't make this distinction, we can either feel guilty about having pleasure, being wary of pleasure itself, or we can become dehumanized by indiscriminately celebrating pleasure.